This program is a production of SECA. Funding for Firing Line is made possible by a major grant from the John M. Olin Foundation, Incorporated. Additional support is provided by the Mobile Corporation, Payne Weber, L. John Polite, Jr., the Friends of Firing Line, and by the financial support of viewers like you.
From public station KERA in Dallas, Texas, welcome to Firing Line. I'm Michael Kinsley of the New Republic magazine. Ever since the Supreme Court reapproved capital punishment in 1976, people have been predicting, with either dismay or relish, a dam burst of executions. So far, this hasn't happened. Nearly 2,500 convicts sit on death row. Judges and juries are adding to this group far faster than the dribble of executions is reducing it. Although news of the odd execution, about one a month, has sunk from the top of page 1 to the bottom of page 23, capital punishment is still far from routine. But this may finally be about to change. The Supreme Court has become openly impatient with legal challenges that prevent or delay executions. It has removed the roadblocks one by one. The court has approved execution of minors and mental defectives. It has rejected statistical evidence of racial discrimination. It has drastically limited convicts' ability to correct their own lawyers' mistakes. In a speech last May, Chief Justice Rehnquist complained that it takes an average of almost 8 years to carry out a death sentence, and he proposed new limits on federal court appeals to speed the process. Mr. Buckley's guests are two distinguished lawyers. Henry Schwarzschild is director of the Capital Punishment Project of the American Civil Liberties Union. As if you need to be told, the ACLU opposes capital punishment. Mr. Schwarzschild, who came to America at 14 as a refugee from Nazi Germany, has spent his entire professional career in civil rights and civil liberties. Michael Tigar is one of America's leading litigators. He also holds the Joseph D. Jamail Chair at the University of Texas Law School. Mr. Buckley, one of the points Mr. Tigar makes in his writing is that people who get executed generally are the victims of, among other things, lousy lawyers. What Chief Justice Rehnquist proposes is actually a deal. Give them decent counsel from the very beginning and then tell them they only get one run through the federal courts. Does that strike you as reasonable?
There's one trouble with that, and that is that Professor Tigar judges a good lawyer on an asymptotic line. A good lawyer is only a lawyer that keeps him from getting a capital punishment. Otherwise, he's not a good enough lawyer. Now, what he really wants is a lawyer who is guaranteed to see to it that nobody ever gets executed. What he really wants is simply to change the law. Only we keep talking about good lawyers on the grounds that this is what somebody up for a capital crime is generally lacking. Now, there's always a better lawyer than the one you had. There's nobody better than he or you, I suppose. But with that exception, how are you going to judge a good lawyer?
There have been a good many executions in recent years of people who've had very able lawyers. And the fact of the matter is, it seems to me that good lawyering will diminish the incidence of executions to some extent, but will, of course, not eliminate them. What seems to me much more fundamental...
Good lawyers might also diminish the execution of justice.
Hardly, because the issue is not whether we punish people who commit those kinds of crimes very severely, indeed as severely as the civilized criminal justice system will punish. The questions are what the limits are within which a criminal justice system is entitled to punish in an enlightened society. We abolished burning at the stake, not because we thought that crime wasn't so terrible anymore 200 years ago, or because criminals had gotten to be nicer people. We came to think of ourselves as too civilized to do that sort of thing to another human being. That's the issue of the death penalty. Good lawyers will help. Better lawyers will help more. But the death penalty remains in all circumstances. It seems to me a very atavistic institution.
I have every reason to respect you as a philosopher, but if I may, I'll take my instructions on this from Congress rather than from you. And if Congress says that that people ought to be executed, or that it's okay to execute pursuant to state law, that answers that particular question for me.
Well, that is a first, Mr. Buckley. That is that you should take your instruction from Congress on a matter of great social policy.
In respect of the law.
I understand. The Congress declares the law.
I don't believe in civil disobedience unless they violate what St. Augustine calls
I'm sorry.
The heavenly city.
You see, that's the problem with your opening remark, is you've confused the two roles of the lawyer. One role, and that I concede that I play on my side and others play on their side, is to talk about what developing consensus there may be out there that capital punishment in all circumstances is wrong. And by that standard, we could judge what Congress says and does. We could decide to join the increasing number of countries that have abolished capital punishment, either in their legal systems or in fact, which represents every civilized country in the world, including those in Eastern Europe.
And the Soviet Union, too, yeah.
The Soviet Union does, as a matter of fact, permits capital punishment, but interestingly enough, Czechoslovakia has abolished it. One of the changes happening in Eastern Europe is the recognition that those regimes now being dismantled use the death penalty, and it was improper to do so. Countries like Iraq, South Africa, and so on remain the big death penalty hitters. Now, with respect to your second point, that is the role of the lawyer, it's really a little too...
No, we haven't disposed of the first point, have we?
Well, I don't think so.
No, I don't know that, but that was...
But your deference of Congress seems to me is misplaced in any event. The question is not whether Congress is entitled to legislate, which of course it is. The question is whether it legislates wisely within the framework of the Constitution to begin with, and second of all, whether we are not respectfully entitled to disagree with the dispositions that the Congress makes. And that's the issue here, not whether the Congress has enacted the death penalty.
But there is a nexus between the 2 points, and that is that Mike Tigar is here to say the only good lawyer is a lawyer who keeps somebody from being executed. And I say, no, it oughtn't to be the right of the lawyer, in effect, to change the law.
With due respect, this was Mr. Justice Powell speaking, who said give them good lawyers and then give them diminished access to federal habeas corpus review. It wasn't even Mike Tigar. And
I'm not saying
Justice
inferior
Powell is
minds
neither an opponent of the death penalty nor exactly a radical jurisprudentialist.
No, I'm not saying that inferior minds don't often ape what Mike Tigar says. I'm saying, as a close student of his public work, that this is what his position comes down to. Listen, he even participated in a seminar, and this seminar was for other benefit of other lawyers who have people on the dock, murderers and that kind of thing. And he said, now try this. Closing words to jury. I'm done now. I've said all I can. I'm going to go home tonight. My little girl will ask me, Daddy, what did you do today? And I will tell her, honey, I tried to save the life of one of God's creatures. Members of the jury, what will you say when you go home? Now, I understand the histrionic requirements of exchanges, but this really hasn't got much to do with implementing the law. You don't want to implement the law. You want to evade the law.
It has everything to do with implementing the law, because the residual notion of our legal system in criminal cases is that no one shall suffer any punishment of any significance whatever, be it some term of imprisonment of over 6 months all the way up to the capital punishment, without the judgment of a jury of peers. And it is legitimate in our system for lawyers to advocate in ways that are designed to point up to the jurors the consequences of the steps they're about to take, with the deeply held assurance that the prosecutor is going to be talking about the other side.
There's nothing in this, software that has to do with the innocence or guilt of your client. This simply says to the people, evade the law, take it into your own hands. Your legislators have said this man ought, if he's found guilty, to be sent to the electric chair.
No.
If the jury so says.
You got it wrong. Because in death cases in the United States, the Supreme Court has mandated that the punishment phase be separate from the guilt phase.
I know. Because this is after conviction.
All that argument does is to say to the jury that after the prosecutor has said that it is all right for them to take a life, that they ought to sit in the solemnity of that jury room and consider whether or not they bear some responsibility for the decision they're about to make.
I see nothing in the words that I just read that invites them to distinguish between those reservations that the legislators had when they decreed the death sentence and those that might be mitigating in impact. As far as you're concerned, it ought always to be mitigating. Or let me ask you this, other than who do you approve the execution of? Eichmann?
No.
Did you approve his execution?
I have said before that as a legislative matter, I don't approve of the imposition of the death penalty. The argument that you have quoted from the last 30 seconds or so was given in the context of a jury's consideration of the legal standards that occasion, under our legal system, the imposition of capital punishment. The argument began with a description of the personality of the defendant, the things that may have led the defendant to do what he did, and all the other things that must be taken into consideration. That's why I tried to start by separating out this lawyer's role that I'm privileged and proud to play from the legislator's role as to whether under any circumstances this thing ought to be done.
But as long as you are against capital punishment under any circumstances, you are willing to use the law in any way that you possibly can to manipulate the jury to agree with you, de facto.
Well, I hope I misunderstand what you said, and so but if that is a statement that I would manipulate the law in a way contrary to the law, then of course that's not true. But it is, as always,
it's obviously not contrary to the law to say anything you want in closing a statement to the jury, except to misrepresent the law, presumably.
That's right. So I really don't understand.
I'm not saying the jury doesn't have the right to spare somebody. I'm saying that your commitment is to keep the law as democratically constituted from ever taking effect.
Bill, every defense lawyer has the obligation of seeking the acquittal of his client.
Yeah, but he was already convicted.
Has the obligation of seeking the conviction.
He just said he was already convicted before
and now the issue is, does the jury impose a death sentence or a life sentence? And the defense lawyer's obligation is to mitigate the sentence as much as possible, as it is the prosecutor's, presumably, to heighten the penalty as much as possible. The jury and the judge will dispose. That's the normal adversarial system. It doesn't, it seems to me, go to the heart of our disagreement with you, namely about the question of whether it isn't much more importantly true that a society that uses homicide as an instrument of social policy when it's called the death penalty is to that extent regressive and barbarous.
Well, I don't think so.
And that has nothing to do now with whether the Congress has disposed the death penalty. Yes, it has, and will do more of it.
Neither did that barbarian Immanuel Kant or that barbarian Hegel, who said that precisely it is an affirmation of someone's humanity and rationality to hold him responsible for his actions.
With due respect, Immanuel Kant made a mistake, I think, in his own lights. But in any case, Immanuel Kant has now been dead 200 years, and humanity, since the French Revolution, has learned a good deal about how the state deals with its citizens. And one of the things we should have learned from a very bloody century, and you and as well as I, mutatis mutandis, have bitterly complained about governments that kill their own human beings, should have learned that governments ought not to have the godlike wisdom and the quasi-totalitarian power to decide who lives and who dies. That's why the death penalty is objectionable. Not because these people haven't done terribly destructive things, which of course they've done, but we can punish them within the limits of what a civilized government ought to do to human beings.
Well, you see, I think that my concern is with the rate of crime in America. Yours is with the rate of execution.
No, but so the rate of crime just as much as you
But as you introduced a moment ago, is saying that you spent your entire professional career fighting the one rather than the other. Now, The Economist wrote this spring, one of the most striking differences between the U.S. and other industrial countries is America's enthusiasm for execution. I don't see how we can be said to be enthusiastic for execution when during a period when 265,000 people were murdered, we managed to execute 237. That doesn't sound like a crazed, genocidal desire to take people's life, does it?
What they mean by that is that while every other civilized country, precisely as our colleague here said, has been in the process of abolishing the death penalty, America has brought it back. There are going to be more executions in '91 than there were in 90.
Maybe we're not a civilized country because we have 9 times the per capita murder rate of Great Britain. Now,
and do you believe that the death penalty will diminish that?
Well, 20 years ago, 50% of the American people were in favor of capital punishment. Today, 80% are. And there's been a pro tanto rise in the rate of crime. I think I have no reason at all to suppose that they wouldn't return to the hangman if the rate of crime in Great Britain were to rise by 9,000%. Have you?
I think not. There is a good deal of crime in England. The Prime Minister there, Margaret Thatcher, has tried to bring the death penalty back, has been rejected by the House of Commons time and again. The European community has abolished it. The Eastern European countries are beginning to abolish it. The death penalty is now.
I'm just asking whether they would have. No, look.
Very unlikely.
Israel has no capital punishment,
but
when it catches an Eichmann, it executes him.
If you want to reserve the death penalty in this country for the crime of genocide,
I
will reluctantly acquiesce, though I will not favor that. I oppose the execution of Eichmann. You raised the question.
You mean you got to kill more than X number of people before you authorize capital punishment?
On the contrary, I opposed the execution of Eichmann because I thought it was not sensible for the state of Israel to put blood in his hands in the process of punishing someone who's, where our quarrel with that a despicable person was that he had the blood of tens of thousands of people in his hands.
But I don't understand what your point is about England. That is to say, there is a lower crime rate there, and yet for many years, de facto, they haven't had a death penalty. The last execution there was in 1964. So that any argument based on the so-called deterrent effect of the death penalty, looking at the rise in crime rate in England as opposed to the United States, has to fall by the boards.
What was the percentage? What was the per capita percentage of crimes in 1964?
Haven't the slightest
You
idea.
don't. Well, then why are you drawing conclusions as though you did?
Well,
I'm saying,
conclusion,
we know that year before last, the question arose again, as you said, in the House Parliament, shall we restore capital punishment? Because there has been an increase in crime. It was turned down.
Yes.
I'm saying, would it turn down if it increased by 9,000%?
Now let's look
to match our standards?
Let's look at that point.
Yeah.
We are all familiar, those of us particularly who dwell in urban areas, with the increase in crime. And I ask you, on what ground would you have reason to think that an imposition of the death penalty in greater numbers than now, or at all, has any impact at all upon the decision of young people in the inner city who are wielding guns, involved in drug dealer shootouts and so on, to engage in that sort of conduct? If they are not deterred by the risk of death from street corner shootouts from engaging in that crime, and if that isn't doing anything to reduce this cancer in the inner cities, why do you think that the state putting them to death is going to do it?
My answer is native intelligence. The very fact that people who are sentenced to life fight like mad to keep from dying in the electric chair, people who are sentenced to death, suggests that they would much rather live out their lives in prison than be executed. Now, if they themselves argue against being executed, with the interesting exceptions in Utah here and there, somebody wants to get killed, if they themselves express a preference for life in prison over against execution, then that answers the question for you.
Not at all.
That is
you
more
think
of a
that someone who's not deterrable by the threat of 30 years in prison is going to be deterrable by the remote possibility of an execution? No one goes through a cost-benefit analysis in the process of blowing someone away in a street corner. The deterrent effect of the death penalty has not been, evidently cannot be established. It is simply not an instrument with which to deal with crime.
For commercial crime, I think they probably do make those calculations. I'm sure a member of the mafia charges more to kill somebody in those states in which there's a high probability of execution, which is really no state.
Or an executive of a major company expects a salary increase for having successfully fixed prices. That is to say, in the business community, where rational economic calculations are made, there is some evidence that there is a deterrent effect to the fact of punishment. That simply does not answer the question whether there's a differential deterrent effect from the imposition of capital punishment even there.
Yeah, but you see, you and I disagree. You and a lot of people disagree. There's some people who say that, and some people who say this. Now, here is the difference. If we follow my policies, we might be sparing the life of an innocent person. If we follow your policies, we don't.
We might be sparing the life of an innocent person.
No.
Oh, yes, indeed.
I'm talking about, look, please, let's not talk about innocent people. Because...
why not?
Well, I'll tell you why. Because in every branch of the law, there are innocent people who are victimized. But unless you want to repeal all penal legislation, let's just leave that aside. Let's talk about somebody we know to be guilty. Otherwise, I think that you will be retreating from your original argument by taking something that easy.
No, I'd agree with you that the issue is not whether we ought to execute innocent people. Okay. No one desires that. No one supports that. But inevitably, given a fallible system, fallible human beings, if you have enough executions, you're occasionally going to execute innocent people. That's not the ultimate critique of it. Okay. I agree with you. But certainly that's a perfectly fair comment that occasionally you will also save the life of an innocent person.
In passing.
Not.
Okay. Wait a minute. What do you mean in passing?
I mean,
some
this
lives
show,
less
this
valuable
show is,
than others? You get to talk about the ones you want to save, and I don't get to talk about the ones I want to save?
This isn't a show about executing innocent people. Nobody that I know of is in favor of executing, except come to think of the Athenian tribunal, and there Socrates accepted his punishment very stoically, although he thought himself demonstrably innocent. No, but I'm saying
he was offered exile as the alternative.
Yes, I know he was.
Be it remembered, it was not a death sentence.
Yeah. Of course he was. Well, which was not, as you say, not the death sentence. But we're not talking about innocent people. We're talking about people who we accept as guilty. Now, for you to say you should never execute somebody because there's one chance in a million or whatever it is that he's innocent.
No, not the claim.
I can say the same thing about you shouldn't send anybody to jail for rape.
To be sure, but at least you can stop making that mistake if it's determined to be a mistake. Obviously,
there's no way to stop. There's no way to stop convicting innocent people
adequately, but you can certainly stop incarcerating an innocent person once you determine the innocence. You can't do that.
My concern is for people who are guilty and get out. There are 10, 100,000 times as many of those as there are people who mistakenly get in.
To be sure,
if I hire him as a lawyer, my chances are pretty damn good that I can go out and kill anybody.
I trust you will retain him right now.
I really doubt that that's the case, but I still
Well, you have an occasional failure.
Pardon?
You have an occasional failure.
Well, I've lost some lawsuits, that's right. But I think the point of the exercise is that as we recognize that that being imprisoned against your will is more serious a thing to happen to you than being killed, so it is that the risk of error in the death penalty, error that can never really be undone, is one of the reasons for the state to stay its hand. And where particularly the risk of error is heightened by the fact that in states like Mississippi, for example, being appointed to a capital case gives you a fee of $1,000. That's what you get. That's the maximum fee to do all your investigation, get ready, and try the lawsuit, whereas the Attorney General's office or the District Attorney's office has considerably more resources to bring to bear, thus enhancing not just the possibility that someone who is in fact innocent of the crime, and I think, sir, that you and I have both known people with whom we have shaken hands who were under sentence of death, who were that both of us would agree were innocent of the crimes of which they were charged. But it also enhances the risk.
I happen to have been wrong on my principal enthusiasm along that line. He tried to kill somebody a few years later.
You can bat 500 and still lead the league in most places, and I think, so at least some of them you'd concede were that.
Yeah, but batting 500 didn't much help the woman he tried to kill.
I understand that. But, and we can explore how that made you feel if you wanted to.
Look,
but the important thing is that the death penalty under our system is not imposed except under certain circumstances. That's what the Congress, from whom you take your guidance, has said. And without there being the competent lawyer to talk about those mitigating circumstances and to assess this thing of the risk of
dangerousness. You don't want a competent lawyer, you want a hypnotist. You want somebody who's going to take that jury and that jury isn't going to execute Eichmann or Hitler, for that matter, by the time you're through with them.
I count the cases I've tried that juries won and lost as fairly tried. Anybody thinks they can smoke one past a jury of citizens.
Brush up on your hypnotism.
Bill,
which was the purpose of that seminar.
Bill, you distrust government. You distrust big government, classically. Why would you want to trust a government which you would not trust to select the newspaper you want to read or the woman you want to marry? Why would you trust that state to determine who ought to live and who ought to die?
Oh,
it's a very anti-conservative
I don't trust it
posture.
At all. I simply submit to it having no viable alternatives.
Oh, it has viable.
The laws that get enacted by Congress,
people securely in prison for decades of their lives. We have reliable alternatives. There are people in every state penitentiary, including Huntsville, Texas, who've been there for decades of their lives until they're no longer a threat to anyone at all.
Well, you know, their criminal instincts may be denatured, but my point is that an affirmation of the solemnity with which we back people's right to live can only correspondingly be offset by our willingness to execute people who take that life.
And you think the French don't believe, or the British, or the Germans, or the Italians, or the Mexicans, or the Canadians do not believe in the solemn dignity of human life?
Well, I don't think the Mexicans believe in the solemn dignity of Trotsky's life.
How do you establish the solemn dignity of human life by putting the state in the business of killing folks?
Well,
that's a little perverse.
If you think I'm going to take seriously the extent to which Mexico solemnized the life of Trotsky by sending his killer to jail for 7 whole years.
That was not precisely a death penalty.
Why
by the state of Mexico.
Why wasn't it a death penalty?
Because it was an assassin sent by Joe Stalin to split Leon Trotsky's skull open. That's not exactly a judgment of the law.
But he was apprehended and sentenced to 7 years. Now, I think I can understand circumstances in which for 7 years it might be worthwhile killing somebody. But I shouldn't be allowed to make that kind of a contract.
I agree.
But your notion that one justifies the other, and you refuse to take guidance from Mexico, one corresponds to the other.
Yeah.
All right, in some kind of, well, the search for symmetry is sometimes misleading and doesn't have any inherent validity to it.
Okay, but I don't.
Let me point out to you that if you won't take your instruction from Mexico, what about the fact that the Inter-American Treaty of Human Rights says to all signatories that while the death penalty may stay in place in states, parties that have it, it shall not be instituted for any new crimes? Why is it that United
You better
Nations
just let him
Tribunal...
answer it at that point. Why you seem to find it very tiresome, this point that other countries do it differently. These are countries we respect. How about a straight answer? What do they not understand about human nature? Britain, France, other countries that we regard as quite humane in general.
No, I don't think they have our criminal problem, and I think they may be off on some liberal flight of fancy, which supposes that execution is not condign punishment for somebody who takes innocent life. I disagree, and what interests me really is what the American people, I can disagree with American people as they do, but I'm resolved to live in a democracy and execute the law. And executing the law means executing a few people every now and then.
Well, how about...
I'm all in favor of giving them much more defense than they do in Mississippi. I think $1,000 per day. And I applaud the work you do in trying to get first-class legal talent to volunteer as often as you volunteer your services for people who can't afford first-class lawyers. I'm all for that. But I think that you trespass the line between giving first-class help and really attempting to subvert, I'm using a metaphor so you won't get sore, to subvert the law.
But is it fair to execute anybody in a country under a system where if they can afford to hire Michael Tigar, they almost surely won't be executed?
Absolutely fair, because maldistribution of retribution doesn't alter the fact that retribution is to be applauded. If both of those people kill somebody and he gets out of it, it doesn't mean that he shouldn't be punished. If you and I speed and we aren't detected and he does speed and is detected, the fact that we weren't punished doesn't mean he oughtn't to be punished.
Do I have time for a comeback?
No.
Oh well. It's not fair. Life is unfair.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you very much, Professor Tigar, Mr. Schwarzschild. We should hear music now.
Funding for Firing Line was made possible by a major grant from the John M. Olin Foundation, Incorporated. Additional support is provided by the Mobile Corporation, Payne Weber, L. John Polite, Jr., the Friends of Firing Line, and by the financial support of viewers like you. This program was produced by SICA, which is solely responsible for its content. For a printed bound transcript of this program, send $3 to Firing Line, Post Office Box 5966, Columbia, South Carolina 29250. Indicate the subject of the program, and please allow 3 weeks for delivery.
This is PBS.
William F. Buckley, Jr. offers 20 years of Firing Line guests from the 60s to the 80s. For $19.95, you can receive this companion book by calling 1-800-872-8188. Credit cards are acceptable. Or send a check to Firing Line, 2700 Cypress Street, Columbia, South Carolina, 29205.